It was the kind of place that anybody who needed to know knew exactly where to find it. From the West Virginia-Pennsylvania line on Interstate 70, it was 3 exits. At the bottom of the exit ramp, you turn north about 3/4 of a mile up the road. Just to the right side, you'd see the sign. It said Abe's. Abe and Sons, it was added later, Abe and Sons diesel service. For those who had met Abe, they would never forget him. He was about 6'4", solid as a brick wall. He was the kind of guy who a handshake that's all you ever needed from him. He was honest as the day was long. He was truthful, and he wasn't the warm, cuddly type. Abe had grown up in a town or in a family with a bunch of siblings. His whole family had grown up in the mines. Abe was in the mines for a little bit, and then he realized 6'4", and his claustrophobic nature didn't fit there at all. After a few years, he couldn't stomach it anymore. He just couldn't do it. He respected people who could, but every time he went down, the walls just closed in around him. He couldn't do it. But he had this ability. Abe had this ability to just listen to a diesel. And he knew what was wrong. So he set up a little shop. He eventually moved it out of his backyard from the shade tree. He found a little spot for sale. At the front of Abe's were 4 pumps, 2 diesel, 2 unleaded. A little shop there, but that wasn't the important part. That wasn't the part of everybody. Everybody knew about the 6 bays out back. The 6 bays where Abe worked his magic. He hired guys and taught them how to work on diesels. You see, what would happen is anyone could replace the oil, change the oil, anyone could do that kind of stuff. But when it came to the problems that nobody else knew how to fix, Abe just had this sixth sense. He just knew how to do it. And so as over the course of time, there was trucking companies from Ohio, from Pennsylvania, from West Virginia, all of them, they just knew when it was too tough for anybody else to figure out, you just took it to Abe. The boys knew the story well. You see, Abe's thought was this. Part of his thought process was, if I can't be underground, maybe my boys can't do it either. So as the boys came along, first was Nathan, then was Ben. About a year later, those boys were raised. They never went underground. They were always raised with the smell of diesel all around them. From the time they could sit up, they were there in the shop. At first, they stood out front and watched as people would come in and try to pump their gas. It was the days before pay at the pump, so he just got them a little bell to sit there on the counter. When someone pulled in, they just learned 2 and 3 years old to start hitting the bell, and pretty soon Dad would come up and take care of that customer. As the business grew, they began to hire people to do the upfront work, and from 5 and 6 and 7, when they weren't in school, man, Ben and Nathan, they were back in those bays. Learning the smells, learning the sounds, learning how it was that you could diagnose the intricacies of a big diesel engine just based on the tiniest of sounds. It became a game after a while as the boys got older. They were 10, 11, 12 years old, and it became a game for them. Who can guess right? And it drove Nathan crazy. Ben was always right. Ben always got the answer first, and the big brother just drove him crazy. It continued into high school, and the boys just grew up there in the shop. You see, there was something different about the way Abe ran things. He believed in a tight ship. He believed in taking care of his guys. He believed in all those kind of things. Every guy who went to work there got the same. They got this black shirt with their name stitched in it. But Abe and his boys, they didn't get, it wasn't just a black shirt. It was black, but in bright yellow. Right there. Oh, it said Abe, or Nathan, or Ben. Those black and yellow shirts were the closest that Abe got to revealing his deep love for the Steelers. It was part of that Western Pennsylvania thing. High school came and the boys got used to the schedule. You go to school. After school, you come to the shop and you learn. All their friends left to go to college, and there wasn't family vacations. The boys didn't go to college. Abe insisted that their college was in those 6 bays out back. And so Nathan and Ben, they learned all the stories. They learned how this worked. They understood when their friends came back over the summer, their friends would come back and tell them all that had happened, what was going on at college, what was happening in the outside world. But Nathan and Ben knew their world was small. 6 bays out back. Those 2 boys could rebuild an engine with their eyes closed. Abe was as proud of him as he could be. He added the "and sons" there on the sign because everyone knew how this worked. This whole thing was Abe's gift to his boys. For decades, he had worked because he wanted to give them something that he never got. But there was this stewing. Ben was always a little reckless. He was always the one who wanted to push the boundaries a little bit. Ben was always the one who was frustrated. And one day, 2 of his best friends came back. They just graduated college. And they came back and they started picking at Ben a little bit. Man, we just had a great time. It's summer. We're going to celebrate. We just graduated. We're going to celebrate. Man, we have finally finished school. And good for you guys. So, well, man, it's too bad, man. If you could have come with us, man. If your dad would give you a vacation, you come with us. We're going to go to Ocean City. Come on, Ben. You'll love it. Miles of beaches. Come on, Ben. Bikinis as far as the eye can see, bud. Come on. Come on, Ben. Ben already knew what was going to happen, but you know how sometimes a little idea, it sticks in with you. It finds this spot, this recesses in the corner of your mind, and it begins to just work at you and gnaw at you, and this frustration begins to grow and grow and grow. And for the next 12 hours, Ben just it was there with him. He couldn't get rid of it. It just kept growing and growing, this gnawing feel like he was missing out, like life was happening, and it was passing him by, and he was always stuck in the 6 bays behind the shop. And the frustration grew. It became anger. The feeling of being left out, the feeling that dad was keeping him from life, it went from this sadness, this frustration, this longing to this anger, this absolute rage at being stuck. The next morning, his 2 friends came by. They had mom's minivan, and they came by. They're like, we're going to fuel up and head out to Ocean City. And he said, just wait a second, boys. Just wait a second. With a rage he didn't know he had, he marched into his dad's office. He said, Dad, I'm done. I'm done. For 22 years I've been here. I have fixed more diesels than I can count. I can do this with my eyes closed. I'm done. And the more he looked at Abe didn't respond. He just sat there, and something about the lack of response, it just threw Ben into blind rage. He sits there and starts yelling at his dad, like, I'm just done. I'm finished. This is stupid. I can't believe it. I've never wanted anything so bad as to get out of here. Dad, I'm done. I'm cashing out. Give it to Nathan. I'm done. Whatever's in the safe. The safe was the word. because everybody in the family knew Abe wasn't a fan of banks. He put very little in the bank. Back in the corner of his office was a big old solid safe. And Ben just looks, give me whatever's in the safe and I'll never talk to you again. Ben wasn't sure what he expected. He kind of expected a big right hand to send him through about 3 walls. If not that, at least he expected to be yelled at, screamed at. But none of that happened. Abe sat there for what seemed like hours of silence, but instead it was only a few seconds. He looked at him and said, well, son, you know the combination. And Ben went over and he started twisting that big deadbolt there. When he got the safe open, he saw about $250,000 in bundles. He raced over, before Dad changed his mind, he raced over to the bags. He grabbed the paper bag, he stuffed the money in, he was about ready to close the safe when he heard Dad's voice. You know there's a false bottom to that safe, don't you, boy? And Ben looked close and realized that there was. He pulled up the bottom and he found another $500,000 down there. He stuffed it all in the bag. His adrenaline still pumping. He wasn't sure what to do, and so he took off. He headed out. He got outside. He jumped in the minivan. He said, "Let's go, boys. Let's go." Nathan had never been so furious. Dad, why'd you let him do it? Abe had never been so quiet. Nathan grabbed the first can of black spray paint he could find. He went up to that big sign out front that said Abe and Sons, and he proceeded to make sure that last S was crossed out. He swore if he ever saw his brother again, he'd give him the butt whipping he deserved. It never set in for Ben and his buddies. They were headed down the road. Ben sat quietly in that minivan for the first 50 miles and the second 50. Shaking. Couldn't believe he'd gotten away with it. They went through Cumberland and then Hagerstown. By the time they got to Frederick, he wasn't shaking anymore. They went around Baltimore, got to Ocean City, and the boys had no idea what was in the bag until they got to Ocean City, and all of a sudden, their buddy Ben got him upgraded to a really nice hotel room. For the next week, they partied and did all the things they could imagine. A week later, the two friends pointed the minivan back toward Pennsylvania, and Ben just said, "Drop me here." In Baltimore, there was a new casino. The Horseshoe Casino just got built, and Ben found out that he was really popular. You'd never believe how popular someone with a bunch of cash is. Ben found out a couple things. One of the things he found out was this: you can get all kinds of things comped if you don't mind spending money. He also found out that fixing diesel engines is a lot different than gambling. He was good at the former, not good at the latter. He tried poker, but he was no good at it. Too honest of a face, I guess. After that, he tried all kinds of other games. He tried everything from slot machines to roulette to blackjack. But slowly, it just kept eating away. The lights of the casino weren't as great as they were when he first got there. He looked for other ways to amuse himself. He became known on a first-name basis with the escort services around there. Finally, he was down to a single bundle of bills left. Word kept traveling as word does on the interstate. There was truckers that would stop by that little repair shop with 6 bays out back. They would share stories of Ben. Abe learned his son wasn't good at poker. That blackjack wasn't his thing either. They heard all these stories about Ben and the fun he was having. See, what they didn't know was by the time the stories actually got to Abe's, Ben's luck had completely turned. The money was gone. He found himself out under overpasses. He figured out the nice clothes he bought at first kind of covered up his homelessness, and so people would give him things. He learned to become a pickpocket. He learned to swindle some people out of stuff because he still looked kind of nice. But as the months went by, the clothes couldn't cover up the weight he was losing. It also couldn't cover up the diseases that were eating his body. He didn't feel right. He went to the clinic on Utah Street, and when he got there, he heard the words. He was infected, HIV. He also heard the word hepatitis. He just didn't know which flavor it was. The clothes that used to make him look nice now just draped off of him like oversized bags. He had his little spot under one of the overpasses and watched as life kind of drove by him. For a while, he learned when was the right time to go down to the inner harbor, when was the right time to look in the trash cans for stuff that people were throwing away. He knew which cops to watch out for, which ones would rough him up a little bit, and which ones would just look at him with that pitiful look of, you've lost your way. One time he was out there, it was late night. He was rummaging around some trash cans near the inner harbor. The smell was just horrible. It's that smell that you don't notice if you're just a tourist there, but when you kind of live there, you get this smell off of the water there, off the inner harbor in Baltimore. It just kind of smells like, ugh. And Ben found himself just sitting there watching the light just off of the water there. And as he was sitting there not paying attention, all of a sudden he felt a kick, and he realized that one of the officers that was known to rough him up a little bit was there. Ben was able to get back to his little overpass shelter. His body didn't have tears to cry anymore. But something there in the recess of his mind, he started thinking about what he wouldn't give to smell diesel again. He'd happened to there in his little collection of stuff, he had a little mirror, and for maybe the first time in a year, he picked it up, he looked at himself, he didn't even recognize the reflection there in the mirror. The healthy face that had once been there was gone. His skin, it held all the marks of the bad decisions that he had made. The cheeks were sunken in. The eyes had no life. The hair was just coming out. He didn't even recognize the face. He had this moment of clarity. We realized that everything that he had wanted, he had gotten everything he wanted. He'd gotten freedom. He had gotten away from those 6 bays out back. But he had traded it all in for nothing. He thought back to those little contests that he and Nathan used to have. Who can diagnose the diesel without ever putting a hand on it? He thought back to the fact that he had always won. He had his dad's gift. The smell, the sound, he could just hear it. He could see it. And he thought for a second, he realized something, that at least his dad paid the guys in the black shirts. So Ben went out and he started trying to thumb a ride. Took a long time for him to actually find somebody who would give him a ride. He smelled like the gutter and looked worse. But finally, he found a trucker who let him ride for a little while. And as he sat there, and the seat of that truck was just massive compared to him, he huddled up against the door and he started thinking about this confrontation that was going to come. As he knew his dad. He knew what his dad was going to say. He knew what he deserved was a strong right hand. He knew what he deserved was the loudest screaming he'd ever heard in his life. There was no way around it. When they were young, his dad always said, sometimes you just got to stand up and take your punishment like a man. And he knew what was coming. But there's a point where his stomach had stopped growling because it was just done begging for food. There's a point where the pain of the moment was just going to have to be enough to push him through the pain that was coming. The truck wasn't going up exactly where he needed to go, so dropped him off at the side of the road, and Ben began looking for another ride for that last few miles. He put his thumb out and he saw a truck start to slow down, a pickup. And a little too late, he realized who it was. It was his dad's buddy, Trot. Trot was a farmer, and he and Abe had been best friends for a long time. Truck slowed down, and Trot looked at him. Oh boy, you got some nerve. Ben said, I just need a ride home. Trot nodded, and as Ben went to open the door, he said, no, boy, you smell worse than my hogs. You can ride in the bed. So Ben Ben rolled himself into the bed of the truck. About 5 miles away, Becky, the lady who ran that front desk, normally she was off for lunch. Abe, it was his turn to cover the front desk. He had brought out some paperwork. He was looking and doing some figures. Out back, the 6 bays were all full, and there was a waiting line of trucks trying to get in there and be serviced. Abe was focused on what he was doing. When out of the corner of his eye, he saw some movement. He heard the truck. He didn't have to look up. He knew it was Trot's truck. And so he just half-hearted waved over toward the gas pumps. And he kept doing his work, but something happened. He out of the corner of his eye, he saw Trot poke something in the bed of his truck. And something kind of rolled out the back. And then he saw this figure standing over there. You ever have that moment where something, it's clear, it's subconscious, something happens that your mind doesn't get because you don't think about it, but something triggers, and that's what it was for Abe. All of a sudden, his whole brain just screamed Ben. And he races around the end of the counter there. His eyes go up. He looks out. He sees right there by the gas pump, he sees this figure. And this figure is this pencil thin, skin and bones, but drowning in some oversized clothes. And he hits the front door, and thank God that Becky was 5 minutes late from lunch, because he hit that door so hard that the door swung open, and he hit it with such force that little arm that's supposed to close the door, right? It snapped in two. The door went flying open. It shattered some glass, and he goes out and he sees Ben, and Ben sees his dad coming, and he's like, "Dad, I'm so sorry," but he can't get the words out because Abe is there, and he picks up his boy and he gives him a big bear hug. Ben keeps trying to apologize, and all of a sudden he sees Becky's car and he starts screaming, "Becky, get Ben's shirt." The one that's been hanging up for years. Get his shirt. That black one with the yellow pinstripes and the stitched name there. And Becky knew with that tone of voice, you just do whatever you're supposed to do. And so she ran and she got the shirt, she brought it back out, and Abe tried to put it on to Ben, but it just wrapped around him. It just almost fell off of him. And he starts screaming at Becky. He's like, call Jason's barbecue. I want everything. Shut down the store. Have them bring everything, every bit of food they have, and get it here as quick as they can. We're going to party. And Becky looks at him, "What? Just shut down the barbecue joint and get all the food out here." And then he starts screaming. Abe starts screaming, "Go back and get whatever tables and chairs and whatever you can." And he looks at Trot and he says, "Trot, go out and find people and get him here because my boy is home." And somewhere in the middle of this big hug of Abe's giant arms is this frail skin and bones. And for the first time in his life, Ben saw his dad cry. Oh, he wasn't crying. He was just lost it. And somewhere in the middle of this face of tears was this giant dude. That was heaving and sobbing because his boy had come home. The workers started to go and get those tables that Abe had yelled for, and pretty soon, all of a sudden, a car pulled up, and it was Mama. And Mama was there. And somewhere in the middle of, she found a way, as only a mama can do, to get in the middle of Abe and Ben's hug. And she was there, and the three of them were standing there hugging each other. And people started to fill in. And pretty soon there was this table stretched out with food all over it because the barbecue joint had shut down. And they brought everything they had. And they brought the ribs and the pulled pork and everything, and the sweet tea and the lemonade. And they were there. And pretty soon people were just stopping by to eat because it looked good. And out of the 6 bays of the back start coming workers, and they start sitting down because they'd never known Abe to throw a party like this. And Trot went around because Trot was a good friend. He knew what to do. He went around and he started making phone calls. He started calling in the friends and the neighbors. And all the way around the table, there's people celebrating because Ben had come home. And as Abe sat there and he looked around, he realized there's an empty seat. He walked back out to the bays at the back. And there inside bay number 3, he heard a wrench. He looked there, and still buried in an engine, working that wrench, was his oldest boy. And Abe said, "Boy, what you doing?" And a mixture of pain and hurt and frustration and anger. Nathan looks and said, "What were you doing, Dad? Don't you remember what he did? Don't you remember what he stole? Don't you remember what he did to your reputation? Don't you know what he did? He stole. He did all the stuff that you told us not to do. I have been faithful. I have done what I'm supposed to do. I never took off. I never took a vacation. And here's this whiny, snot-nosed kid. And you throw him a party. What are you thinking? You never threw me a birthday party like that. And this kid who has taken and stole and robbed you and has treated you this horribly, you're going to throw him that kind of party?" Oh, and Abe looked at his boy, said, "Nathan, you don't get it. Don't forget, he cashed out. Every one of these bays is yours. The pumps up front, everything I have is yours. But don't you get it? He was dead. He was gone. And he's alive. And we have to celebrate." Luke wrote it a bit differently. If you have your Bibles, Luke chapter 15. Luke didn't have diesels in Baltimore back in his day. Luke chapter 15, verse 11 reads this way. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided the property between them. And not long after, the younger son got together all that he had. He set off for a distant country and there squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country. He began to be in need. So he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'My father's hired men have food to spare, and I'm starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said to his father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But his father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied. And your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I have been slaving for you. I've never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you were always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost, but now he's found." Some of our Bibles have little headings in them. Mine says the parable of the lost son. Some of yours might say something like the prodigal son. Which I think headings are helpful a lot of times, but there is a slight question I have about this one. Which one is lost? Which one is the prodigal? What I mean is this. There's not one lost son here. There are two. There's the son, there's Ben, who took off and went away and stole from his dad and squandered everything and found his life broken. And then there is Nathan, who sat back at home and followed all the rules, but somehow believed himself to be a slave while he was a son. Do you catch his words? He says, "Dad, all these years I have been slaving for you." Do you know it's possible to never leave home? It's possible to never leave home and still not understand the heart of the Father. I don't know about you, but I'll be honest, I have met lots of Bens in my life. I have met lots of people who take the grace and the mercy and the love of God and take it and squash it and step on it and treat it like garbage and look at Jesus and hold up a big middle finger and run away. And then come back. I know a lot of them. And I also know a lot of Nathans. If I can be really honest with you, I know a Nathan. Because I can't tell you how many times. I can't tell you how many times and how easy it is to look at God and go, "Do you know what that person did? How could you forgive them?" As if God doesn't know. You know how many times it's easy to sit there and look and go, "Man, God, I should get all the good stuff because I'm the one that's sitting here doing all the right stuff." And God goes, "Man, your attitude stinks, Brian. Get over it." See, the truth is, my friends, there are two lost boys here. There are two. One takes his dad's goodness and grace and trashes it. And the other one stays home and decides to keep score and decides to get all offended on God's behalf and misses out on what God's trying to do. And the story of the lost sons is a story that invites us to come home. It's a story that invites us to come home. Excuse me. This morning I'm going to ask you for a second to just ask yourself, where are you in this story? Where are you in this story? None of us are Abe. Let's get that one straight. That's God's rule. But I'd be curious this morning. Are there some of us who would say, you know something? I kind of feel a little like Ben. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know where God's trying to lead me. I know how God's wanting me to respond to things. And, you know, if I'm honest, I just keep saying no. When God gives me instruction, I go, nah. When God has tried to guide me, my reaction is to push and to walk away and go, absolutely not. I have taken God's grace and I have just trashed it. And I know where home is. I frankly would rather be at the beach. Some of us might be able to identify with that. And then there's others of us that might feel a little more like Nathan. Where for us, we go, you know something? I'm not the person that stomps all over God's grace. I'm the person, I make sure that I'm at work when I'm supposed to be. I do what I'm supposed to do. I check all the right boxes. I do all the right things. Doggone it. And it drives me crazy if I'm honest. It drives me crazy that God doesn't get even with people. It bothers me. If I'm honest, it just bothers me that some people experience God's grace because I keep my nose clean. And for some of us, if we're honest, we have been keeping score. We have a little scoreboard somewhere sitting right up here. And we know what my score is compared to somebody else's. Let's be honest. I think for some of us, we know what that feels like. To know that we have a little scoreboard. And right now, we're 150 points ahead, and they get the party. And everything in us wants to hit the table and go, no, that is not right, because my nose is clean, doggone it. Why do they get a party? What's tough for us is we don't realize that we are just as lost. Because being lost is not about a location, it's about where our heart is. And does our heart mirror the heart of God? And this morning, what I want to do is invite us this morning to come home. To come home. When the praise team come back up, and as they come back up, I want to just invite us to stand together if we could for a few minutes. We're going to close our service by taking communion together, but before we do that, before we take communion, I think it'd be appropriate for us to take half a second, for us to take a moment and just pause. And before we approach the communion table together, I just want to ask you this morning, does anyone need to come home this morning? Does anyone need to come home? Maybe you've been on your own little trip, a little bit like Ben. And maybe on your little trip like Ben, you have found yourself figuratively or literally in a lot of places you shouldn't have been, doing a lot of things that you shouldn't have done. And you just need to come home. Or maybe you're a little more like Nathan. You never really left. But the truth is, your mind and your heart, you have been keeping score. Your scoreboard is like, man, that's your second job. You keep score like crazy. Oh, and you may have never left. You may physically be home, but you're not home. So this morning, I want to invite us to do something. I want to invite you to come home. And a lot of times I say, hey, look, right from where you are, but sometimes there's something healing about steps. So this morning I want to invite you, as we sing together, I want to invite you that if God's calling you, if God's pulling on your heartstrings, I want to invite you to just come up and pray. Maybe you don't make that journey alone. That's fine. Whoever's standing next to you, just grab their hand, bring them up here with you. Come home. Come home. Come home. Let's go ahead and let's pray and let's sing together. God, this morning, would you call your children home? No matter where we come from, would you call your children home? Amen. And amen. Would you